Hey folks, welcome to this podcast. This is a little bit of a different kind of episode. I don't normally do these all that often, but this is more like current affairs. I debated doing this one. Wasn't really sure if I would do it because I'll give you the background. I was preparing a podcast on what happened, the attack on Iryna Zarutska, the young Ukrainian refugee who was murdered on a train in the United States recently. And I was preparing for that, and then the assassination of Charlie Kirk happened. And many of my thoughts kind of coalesced around both incidents and came to a conclusion. And because of the reactions that I saw online, my thought was like, there's not really much of a point in saying all this anymore, because of the escalation in how everybody reacts to it and so on. So, but several of my patrons, as you know, I have a Patreon account, and my supporters have been with me for many years. So I try to make sure that they are always happy with the kind of content that I make, especially on the podcast and so on. So they asked me, could you please do it anyway? So here we are. Let me preface this by the old Thomas Sowell quote, which is, "There are no solutions, only compromises." Which is a little bit of it's not an exact quote, but that's what it kind of boils down to. And as human beings, we tend to not think like that. We tend to think more in absolutes, like, okay, this is the solution, period, and then not go beyond that. Well, what would be the second order consequences? What would be the third order consequences? No, it solves the problem and we're done. And the example I then usually give is that, all right, so your kid's hungry. You've got a 3-year-old and he's hungry. And he says, mommy, or dad, I'm hungry, I want to eat. All right, so you give him, 2 pounds of chocolate to eat. He's not going to be hungry anymore. That's true. And so the primary consequence is achieved, meaning the hunger is gone. That's it. Are there secondary consequences? Well, yeah. I mean, he's going to be hungry pretty soon after, because it's going to give a spike in his blood sugar, and then that those calories are not going to sustain him throughout the rest of the day, or much longer. It's going to be hungry again. So you haven't really solved much of the problem. But when you look at the third order consequences in the long run, that kid's going to have a lot of health issues. It's going to have rotten teeth and so on, high risk for obesity, diabetes, and a bunch of other things. So have you really helped your child by giving him pounds of chocolate to eat, simply by solving the immediate problem of he's hungry? No, you created a bunch of other problems that, if you care for that child, if you say, this is my child, I love my child, I want to make sure that he grows up to have a wonderful life, is that how you treat your child? No, you don't. No decent parent does that. Apply the same reasoning to everything else. If you don't look beyond the first order consequence of whatever policy that you promote or decisions that you make, but don't be surprised that this eventually is going to lead to a lot of problems, and sometimes some of them will cost you very dearly. And that's kind of where we're at here. It's going to be an uncomfortable episode for some people to listen. I don't mean to insult anybody. What I will do is just say how I think things are and my point of view, and you are more than free to disagree with me on that and think I'm full of it. That's perfectly fine. It's a very big world out there, plenty of opinions that people can have. Nobody needs to agree with me. I'm just going to share it, and do with it whatever you want. If you disagree, that's fine. If you agree, that's fine. This episode is mostly for my patrons, who for some reason think I every now and then have something valuable to say. So that is the background. Why do I think it's going to be uncomfortable? Well, because it's going to bring forward some contradictions, and it's going to make certain people, force them to look at certain things that might create some cognitive dissonance. And if that's you, I'm sorry about that, but that can be helped. So also it highlights an important point that I've been making for a few years now, and I'll put that in the show notes via a meme that came from a quote from a movie that I liked. It says, "Principles only mean something if you stick by them when they are inconvenient." And this is an issue that comes front and center in the murder of Iryna Zarutska, and I'll explain my position on that now. So what happened? You've obviously probably seen the videos, but 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee, Iryna Zarutska, she was attacked and stabbed to death on a train by a 34-year-old man, Carlos Brown Jr. With this information, you can find the video if you haven't seen it already. There's a sanitized version that doesn't show the actual attack, but by now there's also a full video available where you see her getting on the train, getting attacked, and see her die. So, you know, caveat emptor, be careful if you don't want to see that kind of stuff. Don't watch the video, because you might not know up front when you look for the video which one you're gonna get. So that's what, as far as we know, is what happened. The reason why I think you should see it is because the video is very clear, and even though the investigation is not complete, there are certain facts that cannot be denied. So what actually happens is she sits down. Shortly after, he takes a folding knife out of his pocket. He opens it. He gets up and he's sitting behind her, and he starts stabbing her multiple times. She's very frightened. She's surprised. She stays seated, goes into a little bit of a fetal position, and only a few seconds after, she falls over and she dies. So by the time she realizes she's attacked, she's already mortally wounded. Now he walks away. There's video footage of that as well, and you're seeing say something along the lines of, "I killed that white girl, I killed that white girl." Now, why is this having such an impact? For several reasons, and the giveaway is that the mainstream media didn't give it attention at first. This happened in August, and the video came out last week and started getting traction, especially on social media, especially on X. And a lot of people were outraged, and there was nothing about it in the mainstream media for multiple days. There was a lot about, some political nonsense that was, in my opinion, really, unimportant, but that was headline news, but not that. Not the attack on Iryna. And this is true here in my country of Belgium as well. The main news sources did not cover it until, if I'm not mistaken, Wednesday. And I checked, I did a search on their websites, and for her name, there was nothing at all. So, and that's important, and I'll get to that. I think it matters because we see this shift towards mainstream media is controlling the narrative and so on. That was the standard for a long time. And now social media has really taken over that role and can push it upward towards the mainstream. Like, okay, this is a topic that we want to talk about. Now, one of the reasons why I think the mainstream didn't cover it is because this incident, it combines multiple aspects of the culture wars that contradict each other. And as a result, it's very difficult today, because it's a very polarized society, to discuss this honestly and in full instead of focusing on just one aspect because of these contradictions. And especially because many people at the extreme end, they will be confronted with these contradictions, and they're going to have to go up against principles that they otherwise defend and condemn other people to when they don't adhere to that. And make no mistake, it's the extremes that are driving the conversations and have been doing so for many, many years. It's not the silent or the quiet majority that is the issue. Typically, they are irrelevant. It is the people at the extremes, doesn't matter which extreme it is, left, right, whatever, I don't care. It's the extremists that always tend to push society in a certain direction. Now, the principles that I'm talking about, or their lack of being applied consistently, these are at the heart of the culture wars that we've been living in and that have basically destroyed Western society for years now. They're one of the fundamental reasons why everything is so polarized now. Not the only ones, but in my opinion, one of the fundamental reasons, and things are actually getting worse, not better. What am I talking about? Intersectionality and the victimhood hierarchy. look those up. I'm not going to explain them here. Let's go over the incident, and I'll give you different frames, if you like, or angles that you can view it, through which you can view it from that perspective of intersectionality, victimhood, hierarchy, postmodernism, partisanship, and so on. So first there's the race angle. It's a black man killing a white woman, and his explicit statement of killing a white girl. Now, many people have made this statement, and I think there's something to be said for it. Change the race, swap the race here, make it a white guy killing a black girl on a train, and you would have outrage. It's not hyperbole to say that cities might be burning, because we've had that with George Floyd. We've had that with many other incidents as well, where it's white versus black, and then everybody goes out and protests and riots and so on. And now we have a gruesome murder here, and it's like nothing. Zip. The mainstream media just basically ignores it. No riots, no protests, nothing. So that's one. So if you are saying that race matters, and it doesn't matter to me if you are on one side or the other one on this equation, then you're going to have to say like, well, here's a black guy doing something really bad, and makes it very difficult to say he's a victim because of the gruesome murder and and from everything we can see and what we know right now, there was no cause for it. She doesn't talk to him. They don't seem to know each other. She just sits down in the train and he randomly attacks and kills her. Very hard to claim he's a victim here. Then there's the pro-Ukraine angle. And we'll get back to how that ties in a little bit. So she's a refugee and she died in the country she thought that would bring her safety. So if you're all pro-Ukraine, you have to be abhorred because she fled war, and then she was murdered in the United States. So you have to be on the side of the young lady then, because you're pro-Ukraine. There's the mental illness angle. His mother apparently confirmed that he has schizophrenia, and she kicked him out due to him being very violent, and he became homeless. Well, if you care so much about the mentally ill, you have to be on his side, right? Because it's not really his fault, and you could actually see, on CNN of all places, this panel discussions being held and people claiming that, well, he's mentally ill, so it's not really his fault, right? Almost saying, and definitely in my opinion, insinuating that he was actually a victim too. Yeah, that's kind of difficult to defend, to be on the side of the mentally ill person, because he just murdered somebody in cold blood, and this ties into other stuff as well. But it's hard to pick his side. But if you've been for years now saying like, no, we have to help the mentally ill here, you're gonna have to stand up for him, unless you want to compromise your position that, well, maybe it's not black and white, and maybe I'm on the wrong team here. Then there's a homelessness aspect. If you've been saying for a while now that you can't say homeless, you have to say unhoused, then you're going to have to be team the murderer, because we're not supposed to victimize these people again by calling them homeless. That was the position those people took. Okay, well, you can be on the side of that young lady then, because he is actually, on the victimhood hierarchy, he's higher than her. That has a consequence as well. I looked it up. From about the late 50s, the deinstitutionalization started, and the numbers again that was a rough estimate, but there were about 500,000 beds in mental illness facilities over 50 years ago, and now there's not even 100,000, and that's counting very large. Now what happened is that, oversimplifying, government stopped funding those asylums, and now we know that a large part of the homeless people actually have two main issues: drug addiction and mental illness problems. So the whole homelessness problem ties into this, and whatever your position in that is here, if it is, well, we need to help these people, yeah, but you just that guy just murdered somebody, so you're on team homeless, right? And if you're on the team like, no, we don't care about those people, just ship them off into the desert or whatever, or put them away, put them somewhere in an asylum. Oh, excellent idea. Okay, how many more taxes are you willing to pay for that? Because it's very expensive, and the government over the decades took away all that money. So do you want to give money to that again? Okay, fine, that's good, but the US has a gigantic budget deficit, a gigantic debt that is getting worse and worse, that is unsustainable. So are you sure you want to put that money into mental health facilities and so on, as opposed to, for, I don't know, making food less expensive? And we get back to the Thomas Sowell quote right away of there's no solutions, only compromises. So which team are you on now? Another angle is something that Tom Colbert said on my Facebook page, is that the guy had been arrested, dozens of times and always let go. So apparently the government doesn't really care all that much about incarcerating people. And then we're talking about bail reform. Bail reform was supposed to be more humane, giving people another chance to avoid doing hard prison time. Okay, well, this is one of the consequences of that. Second and third order consequences were back there. Is that if certain people, they've been arrested dozens of times, maybe they should have been in jail. In this case, there's no argument that that young lady wouldn't have been murdered if the man had been incarcerated. So what side are you on now on this issue? Incarceration, no incarceration, and then the same question. You are against incarceration. Okay, in this case, that means that you're okay with that lady being killed because you didn't want a violent repeat offender put in jail. If you are against, if you are for incarceration, same question: how much are you willing to pay for it? Because it's very expensive, and many prisons right now are actually de facto insane asylums. Because a large percentage of the incarcerated population is people with mental illness. We're not supposed to talk about that, but if you care about people, that's far from optimal, because the prison system is not a mental illness facility. Now, there's a lot of criticism about the what we would call the insane asylums in the 50s and 60s and so on. It's not like these were wonderful places where the care was so awesome. And also the way we view mental illness now, the therapies that are available, the medicine that is available, and so on, and sometimes even surgical interventions, a lot has changed over the years. Still, do you want to pay more money for all that or not? Because that's what it takes. With wishes and prayers, you're not going to solve this problem. It's going to take hard cash, and that is in limited supply nowadays. So what's your position now? Which side are you on? Then we get to the bystander intervention angle. Why didn't anybody do anything? That was a comment that I saw a lot these last few days. There were a bunch of people sitting there. Why did they just allow it to happen? Well, first of all, okay, he only stabbed her like 3 or 4 times, so the attack is basically over before anybody can do anything. And the other aspect is that there wasn't much they would have been able to do due to the nature of her wounds, because she bled out so quickly. But still, it's a valid point. Why didn't anybody do anything? Well, I give you the case of Daniel Penny, who intervened in a New York subway not that long ago, when a homeless person was being very violent and threatening people, and he put him in a rear naked choke. And then it gets complicated and so on. But the point is that he died. The homeless person died, and the claim was that it was because of the choke. Nobody who was pro-homeless people, and you have to care about these people, was interested in the details of the case. And nobody who was about forceful intervention was interested in the survival of the homeless person. I'm exaggerating a little bit to make my point, but again, we're talking about the extremes in the conversation. We're not talking about the people who are in the middle, the quiet majority. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who are the loudest voices online and in government and in politics and social media and so on, who drive the conversation forward. So, are you for intervention by bystanders or against? And if you are for, all right, well, you're going to have to do something about the way that people who do intervene are treated then later by law enforcement and the justice system. Because in this case, the Daniel Penny case, he was arrested for intervening. And if I'm not mistaken, he was convicted as well. Yeah, that has a chilling effect. There's been cases, and this was before that, but there was cases that a woman is raped on a subway or a train, I forget, in the United States, and people just filmed and didn't intervene. Why? Because they were afraid to do so. Because why? Because they would be arrested and they would be punished for it. And there's so many cases of this happening. So if you're complaining about, why didn't people do anything? Okay, were you supporting Daniel Penny or not? Were you supporting changing laws that would pass so that people would have more leeway in actually intervening? Or are you against that? So, and again, you see this contradiction in how you're going to have to make a choice here, which side you're on, and it becomes very difficult to maintain other positions. There's the BLM angle. Apparently, Iryna had a poster in her room of Black Lives Matters. Now, if you're all Black Lives Matters, yeah, well, what about this white person that just died? Does her life matter? And we could get to it in this whole semantic discussion of what exactly that phrase BLM means, but I'm not going to spend time on that. It's irrelevant in my opinion. But at the same time, all the people who criticized Black Lives Matters, and on the extreme end, the people who said, like, if you support that and something happens to you, you get what's coming to you, it's your own fault. Okay, well, so you're saying that then Iryna deserved to die. So then you're on team the guy who attacked her. So how can you hold your position then that you care about white people because allegedly, in your opinion, it's always black people attacking them? But then at the same time saying that, well, and if you support Black Lives Matter, then that's your problem if something happens to you by a black person. Okay, but don't say that you care about Iryna then. Because that's exactly the person that you used to say, yeah, that's your problem. You shouldn't have supported that stuff. So again, we get to the contradictions. Nothing of what I said is necessarily my opinion. That's the point I want to stress, and that sadly I have to stress. Nothing at all is my opinion here. What I am pointing out is inherent contradictions in the way that things are viewed in society. And then the final one that actually I am involved in and have had experience with for a long time, the self-defense angle. The whole thing that's been going on for years is women shouldn't have to learn self-defense. Don't teach women self-defense. Teach men not to rape. Teach men not to beat women, and so on. Where are the feminists now? I'm not hearing anything. Why? Well, because it's difficult, because women are victims, but actually black people are higher up on the victim hierarchy. So it's going to be hard to say, well, actually, we think that this time that young lady is is more important than the black homeless mentally ill person who attacked her. Again, he stacks much higher on the victim hierarchy. So then all the feminists are very quiet right now. And again, I'm talking about the extremists, not the middle of the road. Why? Because they know that if they attack that guy, then everybody's going to say, like, hold on, you were all pro Black Lives Matters and all pro anti-racism and this and that, and now you're not going to call this out because that's going to be inconvenient for you. So, and this is my point. There are inherent contradictions here. Now, as a result, a lot of people feel that they kind of have to choose a side, and that ends up with them having to pick a side of the victim or the side of the person who murdered her. But if you pick a side, in many cases here, you cannot hold the extreme positions that you used to hold before, or make a moral argument. Because one of the main issues is that people were making moral arguments in the culture wars, saying that if you disagree with me, you're a horrible person. The end result of that is that if you are then confronted with evidence or situations in which your principles are compromised, you cannot abandon that moral high ground without becoming a hypocrite. So people double down. And they ignore the principle when it's not convenient for them. And this is the inherent issue with postmodernism, wokeness, intersectionality, the victimhood hierarchy, and so on, is that it's inherently a contradiction. It doesn't survive the test with reality. It breaks. And this is where you are now. Now, the fact that people choose sides anyway in this situation, and with the murder of Charlie Kirk, is what I saw as a proof positive of extreme polarization. In a sense, the principles don't even matter anymore. The outrage, the anger, placing blame, that's what matters. And this is how you get civil war. Now, I remember when I started talking years ago about this is all going to end in tears. This is going to lead to, at the minimum, civil unrest. It's going to break society. And eventually I said, like, this is going to lead to civil war. I remember very clearly how so many people said I was full of it, and how they're like, this is nonsense. What do you think? They're going to be tanks rolling down the street and this and that. And I tried to explain, okay, look at the different generations of warfare, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. It's not like the first American Civil War. That's not what we're talking about. No, Wim, you're full of it. This is nonsense. Ha ha. What kind of idiot are you now? And now this is actually commonly referred to, even in mainstream media. You've got in academia people saying it, got politicians saying it, like, okay, we're heading to civil war. And I've been using that Tom Cruise meme from the Reacher movie when he beats up, five guys in the streets. Like, remember, you wanted this. I said, yeah, you wanted this. And it's not just me. It's so many people warned against this. And again, I remember so many people who, back in the day when they were warned against this, that they laughed it off, said you were stupid, it was conspiracy theory, it was nuts, and so on. And that includes many politicians, media figures, celebrities, and the like. They're all very quiet now, or they switch sides and now they're saying, like, yeah, civil war. Why? Because then they can put blame on whoever they want to put blame, the left, the right, or whatever. So I think that this is just a culmination of so many things going wrong, and why I don't see an off-ramp anymore. Now, we'll get back to it. The question was asked for Iryna, if you're in a similar case, you step on a train, how do you defend against this? You can't. This is somebody who assassinates somebody else. So he uses lethal force from the start. No ramp up, just immediately lethal force. He's got the element of surprise, attacks her from behind. So he has no preparation, no time to do anything. He uses overwhelming force. He repeated attacks with an edged weapon. And it's a committed attack. So it's not just a half-hearted attempt. No. These are powerful stabbing attacks that he does on her. When this happens, there's not much you can do other than die. And I saw so many comments of people like, yeah, you gotta, check your six and be alert, and be aware of the environment and put your head on a swivel, do this, put your back against the window. And it's not wrong per se. I'm not saying that couldn't have helped, but even if she would have done that, let's say assume that Iryna would have put her back against the window, and he opens the folder and he stands up and he starts stabbing her the same way. Do you think she would have defended herself successfully? I think that's highly unlikely. Look at the size and strength disparity. And she was on her phone, not paying attention. Yeah, put the phone away, even if she sees him stand up and so on. She's not a hardened street person per se. She doesn't have, special military training or anything. She's just a girl living a life, happy to be away from a war, sitting on a train going home, and then boom, you get attacked out of the blue. So again, nothing wrong with the advice that people give per se, and obviously it doesn't mean that you shouldn't focus on avoidance, awareness, all those things. What it does mean, and that is my point, is that if you look at violence realistically, you cannot ever guarantee an outcome. And sometimes you can do everything right and still die. And sometimes you can do everything wrong and get away with it. There's no guarantees. Nobody knows up front how it will end. So I have a podcast episode on self-defense advice for women. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to find more of that stuff. But in this case, there's cases where there's no survival possible. Why? Because everything is stacked against you. You don't have the time to react. You're not trained. You're not ready, and so on. And we all fall short sometimes of this. No matter how well you're trained or how experienced you are, eventually you will doze off. You're not in condition, yellow or orange all the freaking time when you're out and about. Nobody is like that. It's impossible. A lot of people are really good at it. Some are even excellent at it. But even they make mistakes and just aren't as switched on as they should be sometimes. That's called being a human. We're not a robot. So that's all of this about the Iryna's death, and then we get to Charlie Kirk. I saw that news. That was 2 to 3 days later after the video news broke of Iryna's attack. And I thought immediately, like, oh crap, here we go. To put it in perspective, over here in Belgium, a lot of people haven't even heard of Charlie Kirk. Especially those watching mainstream media, they just don't know who the guy is. I first learned about him, I think maybe like 10 years ago. I would see him pop up in my YouTube feed. I watched some of his stuff, wasn't really, into it. But I kept track of him a little bit throughout the years, like I do with many, many other people, because I want to stay informed of what's out there and what is becoming popular. And I saw the last few years, I thought he was a little bit better in the way that he interacted with people as opposed to at first. But still, it's not really he wasn't saying much new that I hadn't heard before, that he hadn't been saying beforehand. So I'm like, okay, it's fine, but it's not for me. Even the Belgian Prime Minister condemned his killing. We're a tiny country in Europe, and even our Prime Minister talked about it publicly. He made a statement. That's how big the impact was. So I think it's fair to say that compared to many other events, this is significant. Now, there were all kinds of reactions, but there were some that, in my opinion, completely missed the point, or are focused on tribalism as opposed to seeing, maybe zooming out a little bit and seeing what's going on and focusing on that. There are apparently pictures of the shooter that the FBI divulged and is asking for information. We don't know much more about him. There's a lot of speculation and so on, not much confirmed. I don't think it matters who it is. I think people don't care anymore. Again, it could be a right-wing extremist. It could be a MAGA guy and so on. It could be somebody that was on Charlie's side and then disappointed in something he said. For instance, his stance on Israel maybe, and decided to take him out. It doesn't matter. The people who are angry will not change their mind over that. It also doesn't really matter all the previous attacks that there were on politicians, also towards democratic politicians and so on. That is irrelevant because people don't care anymore. They only think about their own team. I also don't think it matters that the people who are on the other side of Charlie Kirk's position, a lot of them are now calling for everybody stay calm. This is a bad thing, but let's wait and see what the investigation gives. Please don't escalate and so on. Especially the people who were calling him names and calling him some really dark words, then yeah, I mean, nobody cares about your opinion then, because the polarization makes it such that they say like, well, you actually wanted him dead because you talk so much shit about him and call him the nastiest of the nastiest things, and then now you're surprised somebody kills him. And then we get back to, remember a few years ago, stochastic terrorism was a term. Is that, the people who embraced postmodernism said is that if you say something even remotely, not even coming close, but pointing towards advocating for or understanding certain extreme positions on the right, then you were basically enticing people towards violence. Okay, use the same principle on your side. If you call Charlie Kirk a fascist or a Nazi or this or that, well, yeah, then you are also, guilty of stochastic terrorism because you called for his death, right? That's the standard you set. That was your principle. You can't abandon it now because it's inconvenient. And again, it looks like I'm picking on people on the left most of all. But I think that the postmodernism that was embraced by the left is one of the big drivers of societal issues nowadays. But as I've said many, many times before, there's plenty of blame to go around on the left, on the right, and so on. It doesn't really matter which side you're on. Everybody needs to take a really good hard look in the mirror and maybe have a dose of shut the fuck up and be quiet for a change, instead of shouting on top of at the top of your lungs of how bad the other side is. All sides can just quiet down just a little bit. They won't, but that's my opinion. So the reason why I say all that is that none of this stuff is relevant at this stage. Is people are beyond principles, and every incident that happens is just a confirmation of what they hate the most. And because we had these two incidents, Iryna's death and then Charlie Kirk's death, so closely to each other, is that just the ratcheting up of the outrage and the polarization on such a short period of time is what I think is important. That's why I don't think it's important to figure out who's to blame, because it does matter, as somebody mentioned on my Facebook page, that if you want to prevent future issues. But I don't think at this stage putting blame on someone is going to change what comes next. I think that's a waste of time. And what is it that comes next? I can only say civil war. What does it look like? Well, you can. There's plenty of people talking about it now. Even professors coming out. Like there was a recent professor who talked about it, how the UK is almost guaranteed to end up in a civil war situation. We're not talking about armies facing off against each other. We're talking. I think the example that he gave is very good. He says, look, imagine things like the George Floyd riots, like for weeks or months on end, just massive rioting, unrest, protests, and so on. About every 3 to 4 weeks that happens, for years on end, for instance. Imagine that happening, and it goes everywhere. It just doesn't stay localized just to a few big cities, but it goes everywhere in your country. Taking turns, not necessarily all at the same time. Yes, some places might be spared, but there's no guarantee of that either. That's more than enough to be civil war. Now, my point is that once that's over, hopefully that won't take too long, because nothing lasts forever, but eventually that will stop. There will be plenty of time to discuss who is to blame for what. The example I give is that even today, it's almost 200 years since the first civil war in the United States. People are still arguing about who's to blame, why did it start, and so on. And if that happens, for almost 2 centuries, they're still assigning blame. What do you think will happen now when we're in the thick of it? Any argument that you bring up, like, okay, this person is to blame on the right side because they did that. Somebody on the left side will say, oh yeah? Well, what about this example? And they go back a few months or a year when somebody on the right did something to the left, and the guy on the right is going to say, oh yeah, what about this? And you can bring up examples and you can go back, years, decades, centuries, and so on, and keep going. That kind of discussion is futile. Nobody changes his mind, and it doesn't change what's going to come next at all. So I'm not really interested in that. If you want to talk about that, that's fine. I don't think it will change anything. Like I said, I warned about this for many years, and the polarization only escalated because there's plenty of blame for that as well on both sides. Now, um, I understand that many people listening to this will not know where this is coming from. I can't really help you there. I cannot condense, 10, 15 years of societal changes and a lot of other stuff just in a quick talk here on my podcast. That won't work. So if you don't see it now, yeah, I can't help you here. If you only now try to understand why the other side, so the side that you don't agree with, is doing the things they do, it doesn't matter which side you're on, but let's say that you want to look at why are they like this. Not much of what I say will make sense to you, and again, it's not going to change what's coming. So for me, it's irrelevant. So what I think is relevant is that United States in particular, but Western countries in general, have been polarized for years and increasingly so. Now, big thing here, because of Iryna's death and then Charlie's death, is that the Overton window changed overnight. In 24 hours, it changed. What is permissible to be said in public? What can we discuss in public? That's a simplification of what the Overton window means. Why did it shift overnight? Because a massive amount of people were radicalized overnight. This is one of the things that I saw the most. Is so many people who are part of the quiet majority, who basically for the last few years just stayed out of all the social war, conflict, and so on, were like, that's it, I'm picking a side. And a lot of people picked a side on the right. And a lot of people who were on the left said, I'm leaving the left, I'm switching over to the right, or I don't no longer want to be associated with the left, and so on. Especially young people. This is very much alive with young people because Charlie Kirk was very young. I think he was in his early 30s. So a lot of young people actually watched him for years on end. And it might be surprising to some, but it looks like the current generation of teenagers and 20-somethings is leaning much more to the right than used to be the case. So you've got a huge amount of people radicalized overnight, and the Overton window that is changed. And there's a bunch of people who already were pretty far out there. They're even radicalized some more. So that also means that a bunch of more people are going to pay attention to the culture war and politics. You cannot undo that. So this is like a bunch of powder kegs that were lying there, and for years people were playing with sparks there. And that's what the culture wars are. And now I think the fuse is lit. I think that's what happened. How far will it go? What will happen? Nobody knows. There's a chance still that, the government in the US can help just calm things down. But I just don't think that's going to happen. Again, if I have to bet, I would bet against that happening. I'll include a book that I think is very valuable to read, Days of Rage, that I read many, many years ago, where they talk about the far left violence that happened in the 70s. I would suggest to everybody reading that book, and then also look up where some of the people that were leading the Weather Underground and those far left organizations, where they are now, what happened with them. You'll be surprised if you don't know already. So I don't see an off-ramp here. I could be wrong. Who knows? I hope I'm wrong. Just I've learned that my timing with predictions is usually off. But what I have seen is that the direction in which I think things are going is generally not off. There's sure plenty of mistakes and things that I'm wrong about it when I say certain things. But I think in this case, from what I've seen, what I've been talking about for years now, this is all just happening, and eventually it gets to a boiling point and it boils over. So what do we do? Well, I would say, as I've been saying for a while now, you'll notice that I've basically stopped talking about, watch out for civil war. Is just make it to the other side of this. Eventually, it will end. There were massive bombings during the Days of Rage. With the far left, there were massive amount of bombings and terrorist attacks and so on by far left extremists, and the same thing in Europe Bader-Meinhof Group and so on, Action Direct. We've over here we had plenty of those kind of groups as well. That went away as well. Other stuff came into place, but that went away as well. So it's not like this is unprecedented. And I'll add to this that this is not limited to the United States. What happened to Iryna and Charlie is very much alive in Europe as well. And what typically tends to happen, if it kicks off somewhere in a country, other countries follow suit. If you remember all the color revolutions several years ago, it started in Tunisia, and then other Arab countries had their glorious revolution, quote unquote, as well. So people think that only happens in those countries. No. Western countries can follow suit very, very quickly as well, because the same elements are available here for that powder keg to go off. All it needs is a spark that lights the fuse. And we've had, for instance, in Belgium, many sparks lately. Lots and lots of stuff happening here that any one of these incidents can just set it off. So, like I said, make it to the other side of this, you and your loved ones. How do you do that? I'm not going to say that. That's up to you. I would be the last person to take advice from and saying that how you have to live through these kind of times. You want to get involved, if that's what you want to do, fine. I would say go in with your eyes wide open as to what you're getting involved with, because it's not going to be a fun ride. And it might not be limited to bad things happening to you. It might involve your loved ones as well. If you're like, I just want to go to a mountaintop and just live there, or go to an uninhabited island and stay there for the next 5 years, I'm not going to fault you for that either. Everybody needs to make their own choices. What I will say is that I've never seen in my lifetime such a confluence of factors that can lead to really, really destabilizing situations in Western countries. I haven't even talked about economic crisis. I haven't talked about the war in Ukraine and so on. I haven't talked about many, many things, energy scarcity and so on, that are definitely factors as well. So it's not just the social media things you see. It's not just the culture war stuff that you see. It's so much more coming together. That's it. That's what I wanted to say. Again, this one is for my patrons. They wanted me to do this episode anyway. I wasn't really, I wouldn't say that I was depressed, but I was a little bit in a negative mindset the last few days. It's like, what's the point in saying all this? But they said, well, we really want to hear it. I'm like, okay, I'll do this for you guys. But I also have no illusions of anything I say having a massive impact. I had this talk with one of my clients recently about that. He said, why do you do that? Well, I said, look, the saying that we have over here is that every little bit helps, said the mosquito and peed in the sea. And it's a humorous way of saying is that even if you have like a small voice, somebody might still hear it and it might help them. I've been fortunate in my lifetime that being publicly outspoken with a lot of stuff and posting my blog for 20 plus years, doing the podcast, that I've been contacted many times by people that said that helped me. I typically don't share those kind of things because it's nobody's business. It's if they want to share it, that's up to them. But it's one of the things that in dark periods that I hold on to and say, I haven't fucked up my life completely. I've been valuable to some people at one point in time. So this is why I keep doing what I do for the most part. It's not for me. And in case you haven't guessed it, it's also for my children. Right, that's it. I'm going to leave it at that. As always, if you want to support the podcast and all my stuff, go to my Patreon. It's pretty big by now. This is the 7th year, so I've got thousands of posts, hundreds and hundreds of videos. We're doing a whole series on solo training right now. That's pretty much finished, and now it's going to be a little bit more focused. Instructional video is more focused on reaction speed and so on. So there's a bunch of stuff there, Q&As, podcast episodes, bonus podcast episode with guests where you can ask them questions and I ask the guest to answer it. So loads and loads of stuff. Very, very, I would say, democratic pricing models. The cheapest subscription is $3 a month. If you take the one of $5, I think you get a lot of value for money. The one of 10, I think, is the best because that includes in my opinion, very important or useful, I should say, content like instructional videos, but also the violence analysis videos that I make, which I think are very useful for a lot of people who are into self-defense and martial arts. Well, as I said, that was the plug. So anything that I mentioned, you guys can see in the show notes. That's going to be at wimsblog.com/ and then the number of the episodes. I hope I haven't bummed you out too much. Again, as I often say, people call me Mr. Gloom and Doom. I do have a lot of fun in my life and a lot of happiness and joy and a positive outlook for the future, even though that might not sound like that. So if you want to watch that, hear more about that, look up the positive episode that I did a little while ago. So it's not always doom and gloom, but I don't think much is to be said for ignoring reality when it's bad and just closing your eyes for it. So let's just look at it up front and face it and deal with it. And like I said, try to make it to the other side of all the bad times so that the good times can return. Okay, that's it. I'm out. Bye, guys.